Yeah, so very simple, straightforward concept. So basically, initial days we'll write entire script in the single program, okay? But the disadvantage of that concept is debugging, or we call reusable. Major disadvantage, we cannot reuse the code if you write as a script. Like previously, whatever the programs we wrote, these programs we can able to execute in the same. For example, if you take this circle only, okay, this code, how many times you want, you can run in the same program. There is no issue. But if I want to use the same script in this program, assume that in this program, okay, I can't use as like this because when you return as a script, so that will be independent file and will execute as a standalone program. Okay. But if I want to reuse the same code, we can't reuse this one. And second problem, in this case, we are asking the execution input from the console, okay, but again we are not using the, like I mean to say, we are not dynamically passing that input as to the code. So because the script completely executing, so again we need to rerun the program to see the output, okay. And another issue is, here if you consider we have 6 lines of code. Just imagine that if you go for a big program, it may have the 100 or 200 lines of code, okay. Just imagine that there is a 10 to 15 functionalities are there, like addition, the subtraction, like that some 10 functionalities are there. If you combine it all the code as a file, all together will give you a kind of a chunk of file. I can say that a big file. So when you have any issues, so two problems here. One is, if you have the issue in the one functionality, due to that, the entire program will be failed. As we know, Python is interpreter-based language. So due to the issue in the one functionality, it is stopping the execution of the other functionality. So it kind of a tightly coupled code we are writing. Indirectly, because of one issue, we are unable to run entire program or application. Okay. And also, if you have huge number of lines in a single program, there is a difficulty in understanding and debugging the code also, because there is a huge program. It's very difficult to understand as well as debug. Debug means problem solving, or when we got an issue, how to where the issue is and what is the exact issue. That kind of analysis also will take some more time. Okay. So finally, what I'm trying to explain, when you are writing a program as a script, we can run that program independently, but the problem, we can't reuse the program. It is difficult to debug and understand the issue, and it is difficult to understand the program also if you have the more number of lines of code in a single script. And also that cannot be execute independently, that always dependent on the previous code of action. Okay, so that's why they introduced a mechanism, a kind of concept called procedure oriented programming. That is what C makes wonder in the IT industry. Okay, initially 1970s, before, we have all script based program like a Unix or parallel. These are all script based. We don't have a concept called procedure oriented. So when the C came with the concept called procedure oriented, so it is giving a concept called functions, so that we can reuse the functions and we can re-execute the functions any number of times. So that is the reason procedure oriented program almost very successful programming in 70s and 80s, till the oops concept came into the market. Okay, before that we have only one pattern called procedure oriented. But after once object oriented came into the picture, we have two categories: procedure oriented as well as object oriented, like Java, .NET, Visual. Okay, but we'll discuss that also after a few days. But as of now, think about, if you write your script in terms of function, and if you are dividing the entire big program into small functions, then we call that is procedure oriented programming, and where we are writing the functions to reuse the code. Okay, so that is how the functions concept came into the picture. Now what is function means, in simpler words, if you speak about function, a function is a set of lines of code. Assume that here only. Here, what we are trying to do, we are finding some area of the circle or perimeter of the circle. Okay. Now, how many lines we have here? Total 6 lines. These 6 lines, if you group together, and if you want to convert that as a reusable block or reusable component, then we call that is a function basically. So the code wise, what I'm trying to explain, till this day, whatever the topics you learned, that is for logic implementation. But now onwards, whatever the topics we are going to be learning, like example functions, object-oriented features, exception handling, file handling. These all we call as structural concepts. That means this doesn't make you to write a new logic, but this will allow you to write your existing logic in different way so that we can reuse the code, so that we can secure the code, so that we can modular the code. So some extra benefits or facilities we will get through the structure. That is what the basic advantage here. Okay. Similarly, here also what is technically a function means a function is a set of lines of code which will which will reused for n number of times based on your understanding or based on your program basically. Okay. So that is how these things will be working in technical way. Okay. So now what I'm trying to explain. So how we will define this function. So let's consider the same code if you want to convert as a function. Okay. So first thing, please understand a function is a set of or group of lines of code to perform a specific action. So in this case, if you take this script, here we are doing two actions, not single. One is finding the area and find the perimeter. So that means this script, we should divide into two parts. One is finding the area, another one finding the perimeter. Okay. Now I'm removing perimeter in this case for the sake of understanding. Okay. Because remember all the time, the best approach would be a function should target only one action at a time. It should not generally we may not focus multiple actions in the single function. Okay. So a function is a set of lines of code to perform a specific action. What we are trying to do here, we are finding the area. So these four lines we call generally function when we convert them as a reusable block. That means now these four are not reusable. These are script can be executable. Okay. But if you convert these four lines as a reusable block, then we call that is a function. Then how can we convert, sir? So basically in Python, if you want to convert them as a reusable block, or we can say that if you want convert a script as a function, we will use a keyword called definition, technically the full name, but the keyword we used called def keyword we will use. So here we will use a keyword called def. Okay. So used to define the functions in the Python. Okay, so def followed by function name. Here, what is the task we are doing? Area of the circle. So name the same thing. Always function names should be the action what you are performing basically. So that by the name of the function, you can understand what internally you are performing. So here in this case, what we are trying to do, we are performing the area of the circle. So now I'm writing area of circle, and it is an action, not a name. So just mention some action word, get area of the circle, find area of the circle, something like that. Okay. And after that brackets and then colon, because as you know in Python, if you want to mention block, it may be for if condition, for loop, everywhere. If you're indicating block, we should use the colon and followed by whatever the code we want to make as a block, keep as a tab space. Now, simple way, this is one function now. That's it. So now if you talk about the syntax here, okay. So I'm writing in the comments, def followed by function name, okay, followed by arguments if required, the colon, and then write the code of your requirement. So likewise, you can write any number of lines of code, and finally, you may return. This is the simple syntax for function. And remember, function cannot execute itself. That means now if you run this program, whatever the code we return, yes, function is created, yes, I agree, but it cannot execute itself. So whatever the function we wrote, if you want to run that, we have to call it externally. See, even though we wrote the some lines of code and even though we defined the function, you are unable to see the output because the function can be created. But if you want to execute it, you need to call somewhere for that. So to call that again, we should use function name. Function name followed by arguments. Okay. So now likewise you can call the function. So same way here also, what is the function name here? Get hyphen area of the circle. Now you see if I run the program, you will see the enter somewhere the spelling missed it. Oh, Correct only. Yeah, enter radius. Let's take, I'm giving 6. Now you see, you got the output. Now, likewise, you can call the any number of times. Now you can call n number of times the same program. Let's take 30 and enter radius. Let's take 35. You can call. So this is what we call reuse. So we created the function only one time, but we are calling 2 times. Likewise, you can call this function multiple times whenever you require. Similarly, this function now can be called in other program also. Okay, it's not mandatory that you should be called within this file only. You can execute that function from other files also. That is the beauty of the functions. So that means you can reuse the code, you can re-execute the program from multiple places, and also, as I mentioned, right, you can split the entire program into multiple parts so that it can be easy to understand also. Okay, and now two more points I want to, before that, till this point, whatever I told you, is it clear for everybody? Any doubt as of now? Okay, great. So now the other point, 2 points you need to understand. First point, for the functions, just you can remember as a tip or just a blind point. Okay, within the function, we never ask to customer to enter the value. Means within the function, it is not at all good habit to use the input statement. You can write, it doesn't give you any syntax error, because even though just before we executed it, we got the output also. It doesn't give syntax error, it doesn't give you logical or nothing. But standards wise, it is not at all recommend to use the input statement within the function. It should be always outside the function. That is the first point. Okay, and second, if your function requires any dynamic input, as like radius in this example, take that through arguments, not through inputs. So here, whenever you want any input from the function, you have to define as argument, and that argument will be input to your function. Now, this R you can use as a radius in this particular function. Okay. Now, this R where we will send from the function calling. Now, here you can call this R. Okay. Now, whatever the radius entered by the customer here, the same radius will go through the arguments. Okay. Similarly, a function can also return the output. Here we are printing, right? Just imagine that I don't want to print here. I want to capture that as a output. I want to return that. I want to capture here itself. Okay. So now let's take example here. I want to area is equal. Now I want to get that output. Okay. Now in this case, example, if I'm using the print, yes, it will print the output. Okay. I will execute. You see, it will print the enter the radius 30. Okay. Area equal to got it, right? It print the output. But the problem here is we are not capturing this value. Okay. So now let's assume that I'm hiding here print. And now if I'm running, it will return the value. Okay, but it's not printing because we executed a function. Okay, it is calculated the area, but we didn't print it and we didn't return it. So that's why when you want to reuse this area here in the outcome, okay, not within the function, outside the function, if you want to use that response, you should return that value by using a keyword for return. So return area. Now what happened? Whatever the output you got generated, the same output now the function is returning. So this function now return the outcome as a area, and that we are capturing in the area variable and printing. Now this area can be used. If you printed here, you will see only one time the output, but you cannot reuse the output. But in this case, once you got that area, now you can use any number of times the variable. That's the major advantage of returning. Example, you connected with some database. Okay, you got a connection object. Now if you print the connection object, doesn't make any sense, but if you return that by using that connection object, we can establish a connection and we can start working with the database. That is the major advantage of the return keyword. Now if I'm running, you will get an output of, let's take see 34 I'm entering, some output you are getting. See that. This is what you are getting from here. So two things you need to understand here. Whenever you want to send an input to the function, you should use always arguments. Okay. And whenever you want to get print the output from the function, you should use the return keyword to send the output from the function. So these two things you have to remind. If it doesn't require any input, keep it as empty. As before we did it, right? Like that, keep the empty. If you want arguments, send the arguments. Okay. Any doubt as of now? Any doubt as of now? Okay, fine. Can anyone confirm? Is it audible and clear for everybody? Can anyone confirm?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, fine. As we just before we covered like what we call the perimeter, right? We removed. So for that also again we have to define one more function. Let's take def get p, okay, of circle. Just imagine I'm writing perimeter instead of perimeter. I'm writing p, and here also I'm sending r, and now same whatever the output we are having, I can take this. And now instead of area, I'm writing p, and as we know, 2 pi r. So 2 star pi into star, and here return p. Okay. And now in this case, if you consider, if you want to get the perimeter of the circle, again we need to call that. So now p is equal to get p of circle with the same r, because same radius I needed. So now print p. Okay, and here we have to start with starting. Yeah. So likewise, you can write any number of functions now. Now, if I'm giving the radius, for the same radius, you give the two values. One is area, another one perimeter. Okay. But if you clearly observe here, okay, I want to tell you one point here. Okay. In the two functions, commonly we are using one value. What is that? Pi value. If you see here, pi value we are using commonly in both the functions called area and perimeter. But here now as I defined locally within the function as a p equal 3.14, that's the reason again I need to define the pi equal 3.14 within the another function, the perimeter function also. But if you clearly observe that the same line I'm writing two times. Why should I write two times? We can write one time and we can reuse that also, right? So that is how the concept came into the picture called global variables. So generally we have two types of variables in the functions, okay? Local variables and global variables. Local variables means the variables which you defined within the function, and the variable scope will be within that function only. So that is what technically called as local variable. Means the scope of that variable we can use within that function. Like in this example, whatever the pi I'm writing here, this pi value can be used within this only. Let's assume that if I'm comment here, you will get an error immediately. See, pi is unresolved because this pi, the value, the present, the availability of this pi value within this function only, because it's a local variable. Okay, so that's the reason we need to define two times that even the same value we require to define two times, because local variable can be working within that function. It cannot be cross function. But instead of that, you can define the same variable as a global variable. So if you define the variable as a global variable, so if you see here, in both the places I removed and both the places showing an error. Okay. Now instead of defining inside the function, I will define outside the function. Now you see, in both the places the error gone. It means whatever the variables you defined outside the function, that variables you can use in the multiple functions. Okay, so that's why we call them as a global variables. So global variables can be used in anywhere in the respective program. Okay, so local variables means the variables which are defined within the function, and it is limited to respect to function only. But whereas global variable which is defined outside the function, and that variable can be used in the multiple functions. Now you can execute, you will get the same output. It doesn't get any error now, you see. That is the beauty of the local and global variables. Simple. If you want to use a particular variable within the one function and one time only, then go with local variable. But if you want to use the some variable in multiple places in the program, then go with global variable. That will be the good recommendation. So any doubt in the local and global variables? Any doubt as of now? Can anyone confirm? Hello, are you there? Hello.
No, sir.
Okay, fine. So now local and global, I hope you clear. Now the next point I want to tell you here, default value. Okay. Now in this case, we given R as a argument, means input, and if I'm defining like this, it is a mandatory for the function. So that means without passing that R value, you cannot run this program. That is what it is indicating now. That is indicating, that's meaning, that's called as required parameters. Okay, required means that value should be mandatory. Like in this case example, I will show you, like for example, a equal to, I'm writing simply get circle, but I'm not passing any value in this case. See, it's not showing syntactical error. Please note this point. This is not showing any syntactical error because while I'm typing, the system does not aware such kind of function whether it is there or not. Okay, that's why it is not showing any syntax errors. So, but while execution, at the time of execution, the system will get to know that the function is required a variable called R. That's why it will throw an error at the time of execution. Now you see, I'm going to be running this program. Okay. So now you see, you will get an error for this value. First two values anyway you'll get that, but see, get circle missing one required argument called R. See this is what I told you. Because we in the function defined R as a strict or required variable because we didn't define in default value. So system is expecting some value when you're calling this function, some value. Okay, based on that value we'll calculate, but the value must be required. Okay, so that's why if I'm not passing the value, it is expecting that value and showing error. It's showing missing on required positional argument. Okay, but to avoid such kind of issue, sometimes see, sometimes we may have the strict rule. That means user should give the input. Like example, login, username, password must be mandatory, right? Sometimes if you go for registration, some registration field, you may enter the comment, you may not, you may skip the comment. Okay, comment is optional, rating is mandatory. Just imagine that. In that case, the function need to take the input, but it depends on the user input. If user given the input, take it. If user not given the input, take it as a null or something empty. Likewise also we can do the arguments manipulation. So for that we can define the default value. Let's take example, in this case I given the 0 equal to 0. Now what it will do, now this is what technically called as optional argument. Okay, what we call sorry, optional argument means if I'm giving the input from the calling function or the place where I'm calling, like example, in this case, I'm passing the R value. Now that value will override this 0, means the given value will take as an input. If I'm not giving any value while I'm executing, so in this case, while I'm executing, I'm not giving any value. Now the system will consider 0 as a radius because I already defined 0 as a default value. So this is what we call optional arguments or what we can say that default arguments. Okay. So in this case, both types will execute, doesn't show error. Now you see, sorry, what happened? If we execute correctly, get area of circle. Yeah, so so here if you see the function is still in the get p, I'm changing to area. Okay, because we given the default value to area and we still the p of circle will be, we didn't give the what do you call it, default value. Okay, now I'm executing again. Now 6. Now you see The last one we got 0.0 because anyway r value is 0, so 0 and all the everything will be 0, become 0. Okay, so but the important observation is we didn't get any error over here, you see. So that is what the meaning of the default arguments and mandatory arguments. Okay, so here r is mandatory and here r is optional. So that means you can send, you may not send it. Okay, so total 3 points. First, in Python, a function is a group or set of lines of code to perform a specific action. Second, to define the function in Python, we will use a keyword called def keyword. Okay, def, and followed by function name. And function is a block of code, so we have to write all the lines of code within the function with a tab space as like loops and conditions. And next one, function itself doesn't execute, so that means whenever you create the function, you need to call it somewhere to get the output. Okay, it cannot be called itself at any time. And next point, function takes input in the form of arguments, but you should not write input statement within the function. That should write outside the function and send the input in the form of arguments, not as an input statement. And next, from the function, you can use print statement as shown here, or you can return the value. But the recommendation would be return the value always, because when you return that value, you can store in some variable as here as shown in the line number 13, and you can reuse that variable any number of times. But if you are simply printing that output, yes, you can able to see in the console, but you cannot reuse the same output multiple times. That means you cannot use that data in other places. Okay. And last but not least, two variable types I told you. We have first concept is local variable, global variable. If you defined any variable within the function, we called it as a local variable, and the scope of that variable within that function only. It means that you can use the respective variable within that function only. You cannot use outside that function. Whereas global variable can be defined outside the function, and you can use that global variable anywhere in the program. It means you can use that variable multiple functions. And similarly, we have required arguments, optional arguments. Required means you need to pass input while you are calling that function mandatorily. And optional means you may send, you may not send, it will execute and it will show the output based on the default data whatever you provided in the function. Okay, any doubt as till this point? Whatever the concepts we covered, everything clear, or any doubt as of now? Any doubt as of now? Okay.
No, sir.
Okay, so the last point for today, if you're planning to write some function, let's take example, I'm going to be writing a future function. Okay, but as of now I don't have any definition for this. If I'm keeping like that, it will show a syntax error. There is no end or there is no indentation properly you define for the line number 12. So how can we define? See, I want to define a function, but there is no definition as of now. In future I want to write a function. So then how to define it? In functions, we have a keyword called pass. So pass is a keyword in the functions which will help you to bypass the definition, or as of now, I'm not going to be defining any definition for this. Just skip this execution. That is what it will give the instruction to the interpreter. Okay. So now it doesn't show any error and you can able to see the output. So that is the pass meaning. Okay. It is the commonly we use it to bypass the execution or skip the execution of the function generally. Okay. So return means it will throw the key, the value, it will return the value. Pass means it will skip the definition of the function. So any doubt about the pass keyword? Okay, good. So now we have different types of functions. Okay, different types of functions in Python. So first one, user defined functions, like as just before whatever we return, that is we technically called as user defined function, means we can write our own functions as per requirement. Second one, predefined function. We have so many libraries and modules we have available in the Python.
So that internally consists functions. Okay. So that we can import and use wherever you required. You don't require to redefine them. You can use them wherever you required. So that is what we call predefined, or we call inbuilt functions also. So many we have, like some example list functions we have, right? Extend, add, and pop, remove. So that all, even input and print also. These are all we call inbuilt functions only. Okay. And next one, we have recursive functions. Okay, recursive functions. The function if called itself, we call recursive functions. And finally, we have lambda functions. So these are the 4 types of functions we have in Python to use wherever, I mean, that whenever we required any kind of requirement, based on the requirement, if it is already there, we can reuse it. If it is not there, we have to define ourselves as a user defined function. That is how the types of functions is defined. Okay, so this all we will discuss in the next class, but till that time mostly we will cover the user defined functions. Means we need to understand the different signatures of writing the function code. We'll see that part in the next class. Okay, but you need to understand how to write the function, how to execute the function, that you can practice from based on today class. Okay, so any questions till this point? Okay, thanks. So we'll meet on tomorrow class, and we'll see some more examples on functions tomorrow. So based on that, we'll continue the further class. Thanks. Bye-bye.